G'day, welcome back. This is the next video in my series on corresponding squares, where we use that endgame analysis technique to investigate both positions, and also I'm using it as a bit of a tour of some of the famous composers of times gone by. So today we're looking at another German composer, Franz Sackmann. Perhaps not as famous as some of the other composers we have looked at, but he's actually very highly regarded in the early days of corresponding squares and actually gets a mention along with some of the people who are instrumental in bringing about its development. Okay, so today we're going to do a few things. Now, first of all, let's just came across Sackmann originally in the book I have been using before. It's a bit small to read, but this is the Spielmann book, once again, Endgame Preparation. And you can see he's got a Sackmann position on the bottom left there, which is a bishop endgame, very, very similar to the Centurini endgame we analysed before. So that's why we're going to have a quick look at that endgame. And then on the other side, he's got a position by Van der Laza, another giant of the middle of the 19th century. We haven't covered him yet, but I'm sure we will at some stage. Okay, so we'll look at that later, and we'll go through the line as well. But what we might quickly do is just go across to my capture screen and just give me that away. That's actually what the directory of tablebase looks like. Just have a bunch of files. Franz Sackmann. Now, there's not a particularly good English Wikipedia page for him. This is the translated German one, I believe, so the English is a bit odd. Anyway, born 1888, chess player, chess composer, graduate engineer. I think Bianchetti was an engineer as well, so you can, there's a common theme here. These are educated people, maths and so on, and Munich, senior engineer, ironworks. Some of them actually worked in industry as well. Special attention, chess composition. So this is somebody right up our street in terms of the sort of compositions and so on we should be looking for. He briefly was involved in chess publication. Once again, another YouTuber of his day. Porcelain Factory. Mason's quite famous. Mason, and then unfortunately he died quite young in the age of 38. Anyway, that didn't stop him from doing stuff. Let me just go to Avers, which we've looked at quite a few times before. Great website. There's the photo I used, and you can see a bunch of compositions. I believe I've used any of these compositions in the three we're looking at. And then what I found was actually there's another website I haven't seen before, but it looks like a great website. This is a pdb.deutschwabel.de, so it seems to be a German website on chess compositions, and it has 122 of his. So that was good to look at. And then it's this position here, which will be the second position we look at, which is kind of corresponding squares, kind of just being careful in pawn end games. So anyway, 122 compositions, which he has there. And the other thing I want to look at is this brief note by Chess Notes. Now, contribution of David, I won't try and pronounce that name in the video corresponding to as I point out several times in some lecture. Okay, so now Grigoriev, we've come across him. He mentioned king maneuvers in pawn endings, so he's an expert at it. We called him the world champion of pawn endings. Grigoriev mentioned the names of only three predecessors or contemporaries who had become interested in the theory of corresponding squares. This guy, Franz Sackmann, and Tarash. Okay, so he's obviously pretty heavily involved. So that's kind of why I'm sort of highlighting him in this presentation. Okay, so let's close that. And the next thing we might look at is, I'll just put him, scheme of things, just let me run this little program. So my little composition, got Sackmann here, and you can see he's kind of in the middle of all of it, right? We've done Horwitz and Kling and Walker and Locock and Grigoriev a little bit later than him, and Bianchetti a little bit later than him on average, right? Sharon, Barr, and so on. So Sackmann, and I feel like we're starting to represent a little bit better the strength of the sort of Central European, particularly German composers over this period, and I'm sure we'll add some more in. So that just sort of gives you an idea of who we looked at already and where they fit in. There's probably, I keep on using this just graphically, there are probably better ways of representing this, but I've just sort of colours of the country, and then the scale on the side is just when they were active. What we'll do is just look at the position which Sackmann gave us, and is in the book by Spielmann. We'll assume that this pawn, let's say that pawn is not long for this world, then we're talking about what this pawn is going to be. And what I notice is that both these diagonals are more than 4 squares long, and as long as black can control the pawn here and the transfer square, which is there, can't measure that, right there. So normally if the black king was somewhere on these three squares, then it'd probably be a draw, because the only way white can drive the bishop off the diagonal is by putting his bishop in front of the pawn, and that gives any defending bishop the chance to bounce around and cover on the other diagonal. So that's the gist of it. If you go into the Centurini position, then it'll be a draw. So how do you get around that? Now, maybe I've given too much away already, but I would just say have a look at the position. So there's obviously some tactics around here, and let's have a look at the line which was given. So the idea here was bishop to c8, protecting the pawn, and also threatening to advance the pawn and capture the bishop. And you'll notice that if everything's exchanged on e6, then white will go king to e4 and take the position and win the game. So get the bishop out of the way. Obviously, we need to control different diagonals, so bishop f1 is the given line. Now e7, got to cover that pawn. Bishop to b5. Okay, so what's the tricky tactic here? You've got to distract the bishop off that diagonal somehow. Let's have a look what happens. Check. Wow, that's the star move. If you take it with the bishop, then the pawn promotes. Got to take with the king. So this was this little heading was the pin. The pin was the attacking motive for this problem and the solution. And it gives you quite nice. However, I will just go back a few moves. After bishop f1, unfortunately, this study is unsound, since after bishop c8, bishop f1, white can win prosaically. That's a word which English people seem to like. Banal, boring, mundane. Bishop f1, king f5, and we'll see why, right? Okay, not much to be done. Bishop e2, e7, now threatening. Got to bring the bishop back straight away. Now this move, bishop d7, threatening to promote. Something's got to be done about that. So we've got to make sure we pick up that pawn in time. And now we go for the bishop. Bishop's got a hold position. Attack the bishop again. Okay, now we get right up to the front. And you can see the problem is that the black king got distracted, and we can do this little maneuver, right? Which if the king was in one of the sort of key squares we highlighted earlier, it wouldn't be possible. Okay, cool. So that was just a little brief introduction, because it's good to see Centurini had his solution, but you can see that obviously people have been toying with bishop endgames for quite a long time. Okay, so now let's get on to the meat of this lecture. Now, the one I want to look at first is, let's save that, is not this one. This is the final meat and potatoes, but here is the quite a simple looking position. It's good to look at positions like these, because after a while you look at them and you can recognize the patterns immediately. There's only one drawing move, and you have to understand why there's only one drawing move, and we'll sort of think about one of these sort of techniques. So after you had a look at it for a while, I think the main point to think about here is that this is another example of shouldering, and also kind of outflanking to defend yourself. We've seen that before in the Fischer-Daimanov endgame, where basically the defending king had to go the long way around to save the game. Okay, so let's have a look at what what the basic sort of idea might be. Let's have a look if we just do simple counting. Okay, so first thing is to understand the sort of the key concepts in this. Black's obviously going to get this pawn, and when we take that pawn, white has to be on c2. I guess c1 also works, but needs to be able to keep the black king blocked in. Now let's do the trivia. Let's do a move count and just have a let's be dumb and do a move count and see how it looks. Okay, white to get there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and black to get there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Well, looks good. Looks like you get there in time. And the question is, how do you get there? So the losing move, if you go there, why is this a losing move? Because now if you run, it'll be fine. He'll get there in six squares, and we'll get there in 6 squares. But this is the whole idea of we're off the diagonal. We use one move to shoulder the white king, and then now it doesn't work, because now it's 5 moves for black, and it's still 6 moves for white, and white doesn't get a head start because white has to sort of back off and either go back to g7 or go to g5. So that does not work. Okay, so let's do a different method of counting. What about going the other way around? Let's see how many squares that is. 1, 2, 3, 5, 6. So it's actually also 6 to get to C2 is a long way round. We've actually got one move to spare there because white moves first. So this actually gives you the idea of the drawing line. But basically, if we go into the corner, now as black starts to move, we can chase, and then we'll get there in time. Right. So let me quickly look at my little simulator just to get a better picture of what is going on. Okay, here we are. Let me just move that so we can see it. So we want result should be a draw. It's black to move. Or we can make it white to move. Okay. So you can see in the starting position, white only draws if he's on G8 or H8, or all those other squares, all those green squares obviously just goes and grabs the black pawn, or can sort of go sit in the corner. So let's have a look. As the king moves across to F6, we probably saw what happened. If you're on F8, you're lost. You need to be on either G8 or H8, they both work. And once again, you skirt around the outside. You can see what happens as the black king advances. You've just got those squares on the G file now. You've got to be on... The red squares also work if you are to move, right? And what the red squares mean is you have to do something. You have to start chasing the king, and you can see how this goes across. Keep following, keep following, keep following, and then finally you have to move on to right. So you can see how that works. Of course, if you're on the queen side, closer to your side of the board, then you can still draw. But if you're chasing the king, you've got to be around the king side and circle around. So that should be quite clear. So obviously, this is a good demonstration of the danger of allowing a shouldering off, and also the importance of working out which route. Often diagonal routes have the same distances, and you just have to choose the shortest one. Okay, let me quit from that. And then let's try and code this up. So I think that's quite instructional, right? So when black gets here, white has to be there, right? When black is here, white has to be there. Black is there. White needs there. Black is there. White needs there. Continue the pattern. Right, so now we split this with a 7, and then what squares allow you to get on the square 6? Only those 2 squares, not this square here, which, let me see if this works. It's a bad square to be on. Don't go there. Right, that's position. So I wanted to do that just in terms of it. This one you could solve by counting if you were careful, or you could try and work it out using corresponding squares, such as that. Okay, good. So let's move on to the main position, Sackmann's 1913 study, which I have put on the front thumbnail. Remember that? Thumbnail there. And it's one of these block pawn positions where obviously corresponding squares are going to be critical. The solutions given in books are not using corresponding squares, they use opposition, which actually is a perfectly valid way of looking at this problem, but obviously, so we're going to do it using corresponding squares. So let me just load that position up. So, of course, as always, the best thing to do is to spend a little bit of time and try and solve it yourself, maybe using opposition, and then we'll map it out using corresponding squares. Okay, so assuming you've done that or not, let's start off by mapping out, well, we could say key squares or corresponding squares. If the white king gets to d6. Now we're threatening amongst both pawns, so we have to defend both pawns. I mean, there's other different ways of white could actually not munch straight away, but basically d6 has to be matched by b6, and then you can see a very simple process that black has got to keep the white king out, and that's a standard blocking technique. We've seen that in action quite a few times. So obviously the direct approach of king just attacking the 2 c-pawns by going king d6 on move 1 will lead to a draw. Okay, so from the starting position, just mark this as square number 4, which is threatening to go to square marked 1, and also a square which can go to 1 and 2. So we would just on square number 4, and then we can maybe call this square number 5. Okay, if white is too slow, then what you find out is that actually these squares here will end up matching, and white won't be able to win. You can sort of check that yourself later, but the idea is we've got to sort of use the tempos we have. We're threatening to go to 1 and a 5, and at the moment the black player can go to a 1 and a 5. The next square we think about is, let's have a look at this square number 6 over here. So if we go to square number 6, we are threatening to go to a square number 5, but also a square, which then goes to a square 1, a square 2, and a square 3. Okay, so let's see what happens. Does black have a matching square? So let's just move that. And actually, square 6 still doesn't work, because if we go to square 6, then black gets time to duck into the corner, and then he'll be able to defend no matter what. And we have to stop him from being able to do that. So let's have a look. There's another square we can look at here. F5. Now, the thing about square F5 is that black would want to go there. Can he go there? No, he can't go there. So this is where the triangulation comes in. So let's do the move to F5, because that gives us a choice of going to squares marked 5 and squares marked 6. If you go straight onto the 5 square, we'll dock onto the 5 square, so that doesn't work. So let's just do that move. 7. So now black will lose if he goes onto the A6 square straight away, because we'll go onto our B6 square. Whatever he does goes there, then we'll go there. We're going to move it on to the 1 or the 3, depending upon basically what black does, or the 2 indeed, and then end up eating up the pawns by triangulating. We will have done, see if I can do it. There, triangulate that 1 square move. Okay, so that's what happened if he goes to the square marked 5. So then the main continuation to think about is what happens if you go to the square marked 1, that is B6. So the only winning move here is keep the distant opposition. So probably the most resilient is moving to B7. Then we move to F7. And now we have that familiar pattern where you do the opposite. So let's say king B6, I think that's the line given. So we go to E8. So we're threatening to go to 3 square. Maybe if you go to 2 square, we'll hop onto the 2 square. So you can see how that would lose. So I guess the only move to try is to go to A7. Now we've got the distant opposition. You can see here, but 1 square closer was there. Now it's there. So we've squeezed black back, and this is a losing position because black cannot cover squares 1 and 2 and 3 from. If it was his move and he'd got there earlier, he'd have no problems at all, but now it's too late. So if you hop down there, you're only covering the 2 and 3 square, and we hop up with the 1 square, get the 2 square. There's 2 ways of winning. You can either move on his 2 square and go around the back, or just win there and then pick up that pawn. So I didn't map out all the corresponding squares there, but you get the idea that the original position, let me go back, you're trying to cover these blocking squares, B6 to B8 and D6 to D8. So that's sort of the blocking formation, and amazingly, the only way that white can get there is by this amazing move, King F5, the most illogical move imaginable. Okay, cool. So there we go. That was a very interesting corresponding squares composition by Franz Sackmann, who, as I said, was one of those 3 original people who got brownie points for being early involved in the concept. Great. Okay, I hope you enjoyed that introduction to Sackmann and another couple of examples of corresponding squares. Thank you very much for watching.